She called me from Vegas at 11 p.m. laughing. Said she'd taken everything and wasn't coming back. Said she was done pretending. Done with the house, done with the marriage, done with me. Her voice had that particular lightness of someone who has been holding a secret for so long that finally releasing it feels like stepping out of a tight room into open air. I told her to enjoy her trip. She laughed again, harder this time, like I had said something stupid, like I was exactly the predictable, oblivious husband she had counted on me being. What she did not know was that the account she had emptied had been empty for 3 weeks already. I had moved every dollar the day I found his number saved in her phone under the name client Mike. My name is Daniel Morrow. I am 46 years old and I own a mid-sized commercial construction company based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We handle corporate builds, warehouse developments, mixed-use projects. 14 years of work, 12 full-time employees, and a reputation in the Carolinas that I built contact by contact, project by project, without shortcuts and without anyone handing me anything. My wife Karen was 43. We had been married for 11 years. No children, which had been a mutual decision early on that neither of us ever fully revisited. She worked in marketing for a healthcare company downtown, good salary, flexible hours, the kind of job that gave her freedom in her schedule that I, running job sites and managing contractors, never had. For most of those 11 years I would have described our marriage as solid. Not extraordinary. Not the kind of thing people wrote about, but honest and functional and built on something I believed was mutual. I was wrong about the mutual part. The investor's name was Michael Greer. He went by Mike. He came into my professional life about 2 years before everything fell apart through a commercial real estate contact who thought we would be a good fit. Mike was interested in backing a large warehouse development project outside Raleigh. The numbers worked. His capital was real. His references checked out. I introduced him to Karen at a dinner in March of that year. She shook his hand and said it was nice to meet him and asked him one polite question about where he was from. He said Austin originally. She said she had always wanted to visit Austin. I remember thinking nothing of it because there was nothing to think. That was the last time I was in the same room as both of them at the same time. The first sign came 7 months later and I almost missed it entirely. I was in the truck driving back from a site visit when my phone rang. It was Karen calling from what she said was a work lunch running long. She would be home late. Don't wait on dinner. I said fine and kept driving, and that was the end of it. Except that evening when she came home I noticed her earrings. Small gold hoops she only wore for specific occasions. Not lunch with colleagues. I filed it away without saying anything because filing things away without saying anything is something I have always been good at. It is a useful quality in business. It turned out to be useful in other ways too. The second sign came 3 weeks after that. I was at my desk on a Saturday morning going through project invoices when I picked up her phone by mistake. We had the same case. Black, no distinguishing marks. An easy mistake. I was about to set it down when the screen lit up with a notification. A text from a contact saved as client Mike. Just 2 words. Last night. I set the phone down exactly where I found it. I picked up my own phone. I went back to the invoices and finished what I was doing. Then I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard for a long time. The yard needed work. The flower beds along the fence line that Karen had planted 4 summers ago had gone ragged at the edges. I had been meaning to get to them for weeks. I made a mental note to do it that weekend. I needed something ordinary to think about for a few minutes. Then I sat back down and started thinking about what came next. The person who gave me the clearest picture of what was actually happening was our company bookkeeper, a woman named Patrice who had been with me for 9 years and who I trusted completely and correctly. Patrice called me on a Tuesday morning in early October. She said she needed to talk in person, not over the phone. I drove to the office and sat across from her at the small table in the conference room and watched her open a manila folder with the careful movements of someone who had rehearsed how to say something difficult. She had been contacted, she told me, by Karen. 3 weeks earlier. Karen had called her directly, not through me, and asked Patrice a series of questions about the company's financial structure, how the operating account was organized, whether there were secondary accounts tied to the business, what the process was for authorizing a wire transfer above a certain threshold. Patrice had answered carefully and told Karen she would need to go through me for anything substantive. Then she had sat on it for 3 weeks trying to decide whether she was misreading the situation. She had decided she was not misreading it. I asked her one question. Did Karen mention why she was asking? Patrice looked at me steadily. She said she was trying to understand the business better, that she felt disconnected from what you'd built and wanted to be more informed. That I nodded slowly. Karen had never once in 11 years expressed any interest in understanding the business better. That I thanked Patrice and told her she had done exactly the right thing by coming to me. I told her to continue as normal, answer nothing further from Karen without running it through me first, and to document the original conversation in writing and send it to my personal email. She did all three before I got back to my truck. I sat in the parking lot for a while. The sky was flat gray, the kind of October sky that cannot decide whether it is going to rain. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Two of my guys were coming out of the building with coffee cups, talking about something, laughing. I called my attorney. My attorney's name is Frank DeLuca. He has handled every significant legal matter for my company since the beginning. Contracts, disputes, two partnership disagreements that never made it to court because Frank had a way of making the other party understand clearly and early that going to court was not in their interest. He picked up on the second ring. I need to see you today, I said. Not tomorrow. Today. He heard something in my voice that made him not ask questions. 3 o'clock, he said. I'll clear it. I spent the 2 hours before that meeting at my desk doing something I had not done in years. I went through every joint financial account we held, every asset, every investment, every insurance policy, every document that had both our names on it. I made a list. It took 90 minutes and covered 4 pages in a legal pad I kept in my desk drawer. When I was done, I looked at the list for a while. Karen had access to more than I had consciously tracked. Not because I had been careless exactly. More because I had been trusting in the way that people are trusting when they believe the person beside them is operating in good faith. We had built the joint structure over years, adding things gradually, the way you add rooms to a house when you need more space without ever stepping back to look at the whole floor plan. The whole floor plan, when I finally looked at it, was significant. I drove to Frank's office with the 4 pages folded in my jacket pocket. Frank listened without interrupting for 20 minutes. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen he did not pick up once while I was talking. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the pen and wrote 2 words at the top of the pad. Timeline and structure. Those are your 2 priorities right now, he said. We need to establish a clear legal timeline of when you became aware of potential financial risk. And we need to review every joint structure you have and determine what can be legitimately reorganized before any adverse action is taken against you. He looked at me directly. I want to be clear about something. Everything we do has to be clean, documented, and defensible. We are not hiding assets. We are protecting assets that are legitimately yours using every legal instrument available to us. I understand. I said. He nodded. Then he asked me something I had not expected. How long do you think this has been planned on her end? I thought about it honestly. The dinner where I introduced them was March of last year. The first sign I noticed was October. Patrice's call was 3 weeks ago. If it started at the dinner, I said, we are looking at roughly 18 months of planning. Frank wrote that down and underlined it twice. 18 months, he said quietly, is not impulsive. That is a strategy. Over the following 3 weeks, I moved with a patience that surprised even me. Frank and I restructured the company's operating accounts first. The business had always been held in my name alone as a sole proprietorship, but certain accounts had been set up with Karen as an authorized signatory years ago for convenience during a period when I was traveling heavily. We removed that authorization through the proper banking channels with documentation of the business reason. The joint personal accounts were more delicate. Frank was careful here. We could not simply drain a joint account without legal justification. What we could do was transfer my direct deposit to a separate personal account and systematically pay down joint liabilities, reducing the balance to a minimal operational level while maintaining all legitimate household obligations. By the end of the 3rd week, the joint account held enough to cover 2 months of household bills and nothing more. Everything else had moved to accounts held solely in my name or restructured within the business under Frank's guidance. I paid the mortgage on time. I paid the utilities. I bought groceries. I maintained every ordinary obligation without deviation. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside the house, it was the same. Karen came and went on her usual schedule. She was attentive in the distracted way she had been for months, present enough to maintain the surface of things, absent in the ways I had learned to notice. I was warm without being revealing. I asked about her day. I made coffee in the mornings. I watched her carefully and gave her nothing to read in my expression that I had become, without planning it, exactly the man she had underestimated, the private investigator Frank recommended was a former Charlotte PD detective named Walt Simmons. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who blended into any environment so completely that you forgot he had been there. I met him once in person at a diner near his office. He ordered black coffee and listened to everything I said without writing anything down. When I finished, he asked 3 questions. Whether Karen drove her own car to their meetings or used ride shares. Whether Mike Greer had a permanent address in Charlotte or was working from a hotel. And whether I had any reason to believe they were communicating through a secondary phone or only through the number I had already identified. I told him I did not know the answers to any of those questions. "That's fine," Walt said. "That's what I'm for." He came back to me 12 days later with a folder. Inside were photographs, time-stamped and dated. Location records cross-referenced with Karen's stated schedule. 3 hotel receipts from a property in South End that Mike had been renting on a monthly basis since February, 11 months prior. 11 months. 2 months before I had noticed anything at all. Walt also gave me something I had not asked for but that turned out to matter considerably. A conversation he had documented through a contact at the hotel. Mike Greer had put the South End rental on a corporate card tied to a holding company registered in Delaware. The holding company had one other registered agent listed in its formation documents. Karen Morrow. I sat with that for a long time. She had not just been seeing him. She had been building a legal structure with him. Her name was on a company I had never heard of, formed 8 months ago, while she was still living in my house and sleeping in our bed and asking me what I wanted for dinner on Sunday evenings. I called Frank that afternoon. He was quiet for a moment after I told him. Then he said, "This changes the complexity of the filing considerably. If she has a co-ownership interest in a Delaware entity that received any funds that could be traced to marital assets, we have grounds for fraudulent transfer claims in addition to the divorce proceedings. File whenever you're ready," I said. He asked me when I wanted to move. I told him I was going to wait for one more thing. I wanted to know what they were planning to do next and when they were planning to do it. Because I did not just want to be protected. I wanted to be standing exactly where they expected empty space to be when they finally made their move. Frank said he understood. He said to call him the moment anything shifted. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I went back to the kitchen and made dinner and waited. The waiting took 3 more weeks. Karen became incrementally more distracted during that period. Small things. She forgot to pick up the dry cleaning twice. She started going to bed earlier, which she explained as stress from work. She checked her phone more frequently but had become better at angling the screen away. A habit she had apparently developed without realizing I had already noticed it months earlier. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. Walt checked in every few days with updates that told me the tempo was accelerating. Mike had vacated the South End rental at the end of the month. His forwarding address was a property in Nevada. Las Vegas specifically. He had already been there for 2 weeks. She was going to go to him. The only question was when and whether she was going to try to move money before she left. That question answered itself on a Thursday evening in November when Karen told me she had a work conference in Phoenix the following weekend. 3 days. She had already booked her flight. I checked the flight booking through the household account she had used. The departure airport was Charlotte Douglas. The destination was not Phoenix. It was Las Vegas. I called Frank that night. "Everything is already in place," he said. "Whenever she moves, we move." I told him to be ready for the weekend. Then I went to bed and slept without difficulty for the first time in months because there is a particular kind of peace that comes not from resolution but from knowing that everything you could do has been done and all that remains is for the other side to take the step they have been planning all along. Karen left on a Friday morning with a rolling suitcase and a carry-on and a smile that was almost convincing. "Have a good conference," I said from the kitchen doorway. She said she would try. I watched her car back out of the driveway. Then I poured a second coffee and called Walt. "She's on her way." I said. "I know," Walt replied. "I'm already at the airport." She called at 11:04 p.m. on a Friday night. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a site proposal for a warehouse project in Greensboro. The work had kept me sane through all of it. There is something clarifying about blueprints and load calculations and concrete specifications. Problems with defined solutions. Numbers that either work or they don't. I had leaned into the work harder than usual over those 3 months, and the company had benefited from it in ways that would show clearly in the year-end numbers. Her name lit up my phone screen. I set down my pen and answered on the 3rd ring. "Daniel." Her voice was bright and loose in the way that people sound when they have been drinking champagne and finally saying out loud the thing they have been rehearsing privately for months. I have something to tell you. Go ahead. I said. I'm not coming back. She let that land for a moment. I've moved everything out of the joint account. I'm with someone who actually sees me. I'm done with Charlotte, and I'm done with this marriage, and I'm done pretending any of it was working. I could hear noise behind her. Music, conversation, the ambient sound of a hotel bar or a restaurant. Mike Greer was probably 6 feet away. I understand, I said. That was not the response she expected. I heard a brief hesitation in her breathing. That's it? She said. That's all you have to say? I hope you have a good trip, Karen. Another pause, longer this time. Then the laugh came. That particular laugh of someone who has decided the other person simply does not understand the magnitude of what is happening to them. You don't get it, she said. I took everything. There's nothing left in the account. You should check it. I appreciate you letting me know, I said. The laugh faded slightly at the edges. She had expected something different. Anger, panic, the sound of a man realizing he had been blindsided. She was recalibrating in real time and not finding solid ground. Good night, Karen, I said. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. Then I picked up my pen and went back to the Greensboro proposal. Frank called me at 8:15 the following morning. She attempted 4 transfers last night, he said without preamble. 2 from the joint account, 1 from the secondary savings, 1 that appears to have been an attempt to access a business account using credentials that were revoked 6 weeks ago. How much did she get? I asked. Frank paused for exactly 1 second. $412. The remaining balance in the joint account that we left for household bills. I absorbed that $412 was what 11 years and 18 months of planning had produced for Karen Morrow on a Friday night in Las Vegas. The Delaware holding company, Frank continued, has been flagged in our filing as a vehicle for potential fraudulent transfer. Her co-ownership interest in it is now part of the discovery record. Whatever Mike Greer has moved through that entity is going to receive considerable legal attention in the weeks ahead. What about the Greensboro project? I said. Frank laughed once, a short, genuine sound. The investor documentation is clean. Everything you restructured over the past 3 months is properly documented and legally defensible. She has no claim on anything we moved because we moved it correctly and we moved it before any legal action was initiated against you. I looked out the window at the backyard. The flower beds along the fence line. I had finally gotten to them 2 weekends ago. Pulled everything out, turned the soil, planted something new. They looked better than they had in years. File everything today, I told Frank. All of it. Already done, he said. As of 9 this morning. Karen came back to Charlotte 4 days later. Not to the house. She had apparently understood somewhere between the failed transfers and the calls from Frank's office that the house was no longer a place she could simply return to. She stayed with her sister in Dilworth and retained an attorney named Susan Briggs who had a reputation for aggressive initial positioning. Susan Briggs filed a response to our divorce petition that challenged the asset restructuring on the grounds that it had been conducted in anticipation of divorce proceedings and therefore constituted dissipation of marital assets. Frank had anticipated this argument precisely. He produced the documentation showing that every transfer had been conducted for legitimate business reasons, supported by Patrice's written account of Karen's unauthorized inquiry into the company's financial structure. Walt's investigative report establishing the 18-month timeline of planning on Karen and Mike's side, and the Delaware holding company registration showing Karen's co-ownership interest in an entity formed during the marriage without my knowledge or consent. The dissipation argument, Frank explained to me over coffee in his office the week after the filing, requires the court to believe that you moved assets to deprive her of something she was entitled to. What we're showing instead is that you secured assets from someone who had already demonstrated intent to misappropriate them. That's a fundamentally different legal posture. Susan Briggs revised her filing 2 weeks later. The revised version dropped the dissipation claim entirely. I noted that without comment. Mike Greer's situation deteriorated with a speed that I had not fully anticipated but that Frank had apparently expected. The Delaware holding company, once it entered the discovery record, attracted attention from 2 directions simultaneously. Frank's forensic accountant found evidence that Mike had moved a portion of my business guarantee funds through the entity before the Raleigh warehouse project had even broken ground. Money I had provided for a specific development purpose had been redirected through a shell structure before a single foundation was poured. That was not a civil matter. That was something else. Frank referred the documentation to a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Charlotte who handled financial fraud cases. I was not involved in that referral beyond providing the documents Frank requested. What happened after that was not my concern and not my doing. It was simply the natural consequence of a paper trail that Mike Greer had apparently believed would never be examined closely. He had believed that because he had believed I was the kind of man who would never look. He had been wrong about that from the beginning. Walt sent me a brief text 3 weeks after the referral. 2 words. Feds involved. I read it once, replied with a thank you, and went back to the site plan I was reviewing. Karen and I did not speak directly again until the mandatory mediation session required by the court before the final hearing. We sat on opposite sides of a conference table in a downtown office building on a gray Wednesday morning in February. She looked different than she had the last time I had seen her in person, the morning she left with the rolling suitcase. Not older exactly. Smaller somehow. The particular diminishment of someone whose plan has not produced what the plan promised. Her attorney Susan Briggs sat beside her. Frank sat beside me. A mediator named Richard Cole presided with the patient neutrality of a man who had seen every version of the situation and had stopped being surprised by any of them. The session lasted 3 hours. Karen received her share of the legitimately held marital assets calculated from the date of our marriage through the date of filing, minus the $412 she had successfully transferred on a Friday night in Las Vegas, which Frank noted in the documentation with a precision that I appreciated. She received nothing from the business. The company had been established before our marriage using premarital capital and had been held in my name throughout. Her attempt to access the business accounts was documented and worked against her claim. The Delaware holding company was frozen pending the federal investigation. Whatever she had expected to receive from that structure was not available to her and would not be for the foreseeable future. Mike Greer was not present at the mediation. His attorney had filed a notice of separate representation from Karen's case 3 weeks earlier. Whatever partnership they had imagined building in Sedona or Las Vegas or anywhere else had apparently not survived contact with federal investigators and the complete collapse of the financial architecture they had constructed together. Susan Briggs was professional and thorough throughout the session. At one point, she looked at the asset documentation Frank had assembled and was quiet for a moment longer than the situation required. Then she moved on to the next item without comment. Karen looked at me directly once during the 3 hours. It was near the end of the session during a brief recess when the attorneys had stepped out and we were briefly alone in the conference room for approximately 90 seconds. She said my name. Just that. Daniel. I looked at her. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. Whatever she had intended to say had apparently not survived the journey from thought to words. I did not fill the silence. The attorneys came back in and we finished the session and I shook Richard Cole's hand and walked out of the building into the February cold with Frank beside me. Good, Frank said simply, buttoning his coat. Yes, I said. We walked to our separate cars without further discussion because there was nothing further to discuss. The work was done. Patrice brought coffee to my office on a Thursday morning in March, 6 weeks after the mediation. She set it on my desk, started to leave, then paused at the door. Can I say something? She asked. Of course. She turned around. I've worked for you for 9 years. She folded her hands in front of her in the careful way she had when she was choosing words precisely. I knew something was wrong before I called you in October. I had known for a few weeks. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. She met my eyes. I should have called you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I looked at her for a moment. You called me when you were certain, I said. That was exactly right. She nodded once, accepting that, then walked back to her desk. I turned to the window. The city was doing what cities do on Thursday mornings in March. Moving, indifferent, entirely uninterested in the particular things that had concluded in a conference room 6 weeks ago. The Greensboro warehouse project had broken ground the previous week. 12 employees were working. The company's books were clean and solid and entirely my own. I had a site visit at 2 o'clock that afternoon and a proposal review at 4. I picked up my coffee and looked at the blueprints spread across my desk. Clean lines. Defined problems. Numbers that either worked or they didn't. I had always been good at this. I went back to work. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who is planning against you is simply to be more prepared than they expected you to be. Not louder. Not angrier. Just more prepared. Do the work quietly. Document everything. Trust the right people. And when they finally make their move, be standing exactly where they thought the ground would be empty.